Namaste and welcome to Insight UK. Insight UK is marking the month of October as the Hindu Persecution Awareness Month. And as part of this campaign, we are hosting a series of podcasts and inviting special guests to speak about the persecution of Hindus globally. Today, we have Aditya Kaul with us. He's Executive Director of TV9 Network, is a well-known Indian journalist with over a decade of work experience in critical breaking news situations and leadership roles. He was recently awarded the Jethmalani Award for Journalism. Namaste, Aditya ji.
Namaste. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Aditya ji, you come from the land of Rishi Kashyap and Kashmir Shaivism, the crown of our Vedic tradition of Sanatan Dharma. Yet, we had nearly 4 lakh Kashmiri Hindus ethnically cleansed from their homeland of 5,000 years to become displaced in their own country, your family being one amongst them. Why did this happen? Who were the perpetrators?
Well, where do I begin? It's a long story. And even if we speak for hours together, for days together, it won't be enough. And it's not just about our story. It's not just about what happened in 1990, the forced exodus, the ethnic cleansing, or the genocide. It's also about 35 years of silence that people had on the exodus. Nobody spoke about it. Nobody delivered justice. Nobody even acknowledged the plight of the Kashmiri Hindus. And that is the biggest concern. The world remains silent. And it's only after, Kashmiri Pandits actually took to the streets, protested, demanded for their rights, in fact, countered a lot of radical Islamist separatists who used to speak against India and incite violence against the security forces and against minorities. And this, protest had already begun in 1990. But the concern for the Kashmiri Hindus at that time was to, really look for their livelihood, because we had lost everything in Kashmir Valley. We were in camps, which were called, refugee camps, but, we were technically internally displaced people. And we had nobody to support us. I mean, government did give us a little bit of ration and a little bit of help. But that clearly wasn't enough. So on our own merit, on our own education, on our own feet, we not only took this to the streets, but at the same time, cared for our younger folks. I was just about 9 months old at that time in January 1990. And my mother and my grandparents were alone at home when we had actually Muslim Islamist radical mobs actually going to the areas where the Hindu minorities used to live and scare them, intimidate them, and tell them to leave. We were asked to leave midnight. We were told that if you stay, you will be killed, you'll be lynched. And there were actually loudspeakers from mosques in these areas that were used to tell Kashmiri Hindus that you cannot live anymore. There was a very famous slogan used by these radical Islamist mobs that was "Relive, Galiv, or Salif." And that meant either you become and take over Islam and convert, or you perish, or you run away from it. These were the only 3, things that were given to us. So my family had to leave on the midnight of 19th and 20th January 1990. We took a bus and a taxi, and then finally reached Jammu. In Jammu, we stayed in a camp, which was actually a cow shed. And there was a garage attached to a cow shed. We stayed there for about 3 months. About a dozen odd people in that cow shed. And thus began our journey. I was born in Kashmir, but I think I took rebirth in that camp because we survived. And my parents, in those few months in the camp, decided that we actually would have to restart our lives in Delhi. So we moved to Delhi. And again, we stayed in Delhi for 6 months in a room which had no windows. I mean, in Kashmir, we had an ancestral house which was like huge, on 3 floors, which had more than a dozen rooms. We had a beautiful garden. We were overlooking the mountains and the Shankaracharya temple and the Dal Lake. And suddenly, overnight, we lost everything. We didn't only use our material wealth, we lost our temples. We lost our heritage, our culture, our books, we had that ancestral house of 150 years or perhaps 200 years. And my great-grandfather, Master Samsachan Kaul, was Asia's one of the first ornithologists. Even Salim Ali and others used to come to him and study. And he had a huge library of books. Imagine 100, 200-year-old books that he had. And over 100 years ago, he was member of the National Geographic Society and a lot of such groups. And he had such a great, library of artifacts and books. And suddenly in the mid-1990s, when we were in Delhi, Doordarshan aired a documentary on my great-grandfather, Master Samsachan Kaul, to talk about his, teaching career in the Bisco School in Kashmir and how, he encouraged people to think scientifically at a time when, we were a little orthodox. And suddenly, when Doordarshan aired that documentary in this famous program called Kashmir File, in the mid-90s, I think it was around 95 or 96, terrorists actually barged inside the house and they burnt the entire house. So we lost the entire house. We had not got any goods, anything. The only thing that my parents carried from that house was a temple, which we call in Kashmiri Dhukurkut, and the certificates, education certificates, because these are the two things that were necessary for us, because we are Hindus, we believe in the Almighty, and actually feel that, that's our last hope. God is our last hope. And we are obviously Shiva worshippers of Sri Ram. And, that Dhukurkut, that temple is still with us in these last 34 years. And of course, certificates that helped us really move on. And actually, if I'm speaking to you as a journalist today or whatever little I've achieved in these years is only because of that. But as you said, why this happened? It's again a long story. It happened because there was a lot of radicalization that happened in Kashmir. There was obviously a lot of support from Pakistan, a sponsored terrorism that happened in Kashmir. And of course, we were a minority. We were a minuscule minority in the Kashmir Valley. We were teachers. We were in the education department. We were in the finance department. And this was something that the radicals and the Islamist mobs didn't like. And obviously, they targeted us. They saw us as a symbol of India in Kashmir. They saw us as not just Hindus, but symbols of India. And that's why we were targeted. There were selected killings that happened in the Kashmir Valley. One of the first to die was, in fact, Tikal Al-Taplu, a prominent advocate, and he was the vice president of the BJP in the Kashmir Valley. He was gunned down outside his residence when he was actually giving a toffee or a chocolate to a little child. And suddenly, Yasin Malik and other terrorists came from behind and killed him. Similarly, Sarvanand Kaul Premi and his son, Virender Premi, were in fact killed in Anantnag. Sarvanand Kaul Premi was a very secular person. He was a teacher. He was also a poet, a writer, a very famous person who had translated the Ramayana and the Mahabharata into Urdu. And he was killed for no reason. They were hanged with a tree in Anantnag. What was his crime? He was actually friends with a lot of local Muslims, but yet he was killed. Then there was Justice Neelkant Ganju, who was a judge, and he was the judge who had given the death sentence to Maqbul Butt. And Maqbul Butt, as you know, was the JKLF leader or terrorist who was killed after Indian diplomat Ravindra Matre was killed in Birmingham in United Kingdom, again by the same Pakistani and Kashmiri terrorists. And for last 40 years, as you know, of course, the kidnappers were arrested and charged, and they spent about 2 decades in prison. But the main killer is still at large in Pakistan, and UK has done nothing. And in fact, India has also not done much to actually think about this case or push this case so that extradition of that terrorist actually happens. Imagine a diplomat being killed and the perpetrator still being on the run. So Maqbul Butt was hanged, and in Kashmir, Neelkant Ganju in 89-90 was killed by the same JKLF terrorists. And there was Lasa Kaul, the Doordarshan director, who again had no rivalry with any person. He had no significant political views, and still he was gunned down. So there are hundreds of such Kashmiri Hindus who were killed, many of them kidnapped, many of them lost their homes were burned, temples were desecrated completely. And yet there was no justice at all in these last 30 years. So it happened because of a lot of reasons. If I go into the politics of it, of course, people say that 1987 rigging happened, but that's not the beginning. In 1971, if I tell you, the first hijacking of an Indian plane took place. This was Ganga. The aircraft was called Ganga. It was flying from Srinagar, and then it was taken to Pakistan. And this was done by a person named Hashim Qureshi. And thereafter, while all the people were rescued, but Hashim Qureshi spent around 9 years in Pakistani jail. And he, along with Makbul Bhatt and others, Amanullah Khan and others, started the JKLF. And JKLF much later took a violent turn. They took to arms. And of course, there was this Haji group led by Yasin Malik and others who actually killed Kashmiri Hindus and led to this violence and bloodshed in the Kashmir Valley. And we've seen 3 decades of this unfortunate bloodshed, terror, and violence against minorities and against anybody in Kashmir who believes in the idea of India, who believes in the Indian Constitution, and proudly unfurls the Indian flag.
Yes, and Aditya ji, you did mention that there was so much silence around this travesty and injustice. Nobody was speaking about this. So why do you think, they don't mention it as often as the Holocaust is spoken about?
Well, probably because our numbers are not that much. We are, of course, not a vote bank. And of course, as I said, when we met this forced exodus from Kashmir, our focus also was more towards saving our children, saving our youth, saving and actually looking forward to our livelihoods, how to live our daily lives, how to find jobs, how to get education for the children and youth. That was our focus. And, one thing very astonishing, which many, Kashmiri Muslim radicals and terrorists speak about, is about so-called human rights violations, etc., and how they picked up the gun and how the government forced them to pick up the gun. Now imagine what the Kashmiri Hindus went through. We never picked up the gun. We never bombed anybody. We never believed in revenge against Kashmiri Muslims for killing us, for taking over our homes, for making us leave our homeland. And it was a Kashmiri Hindu land originally. It's a Kashyap Bhumi. I mean, we never forced them out in any way. This is how humanity is different for different people. And I think Kashmiri Hindus have symbolized in many ways for absorbing the pain the last more than 30 years. I don't know. I long every day to return home. And in these last 30 years, I've gone there often since 2013, maybe more than 24 times. But I've always gone there as a journalist. I've always gone there professionally. I've never gone there to return to my home or with my family to actually see where I lived. Of course, I've gone through that area while on my journalistic assignments. But it's different when you travel as a tourist or as a professional, or actually when you travel home to see your homeland. There was this silence because the so-called intelligentsia in India, the so-called governments in power in India, and the so-called human rights groups, etc., never bothered to speak about it. They were more bothered about a lot of other things than Kashmiri Hindus. They love to speak about Gujarat riots. They love to speak about Muzaffarnagar riots, which happened recently. They even go on to the Babri Masjid demolition. But never do they speak about Kashmiri Hindus, 500,000 people who met forced exodus and ethnic cleansing, lost their homes forever. The biggest tragedy ever since the Holocaust. And of course, our temples that were desecrated, taken over, the murtis and the, of Shiva murtis or old murtis that were broken. Some were taken away, some were stolen, some were sold, some were thrown into the rivers out there. So a lot has happened, but nobody cared. In fact, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch completely remained mute spectators and exposed their biased attitude towards this minuscule minority community. We had the likes of so-called Arundhati Roy and others, human rights so-called activists and writers, never cared about Kashmir. In fact, I remember in 2010, Arundhati Roy was sitting with hardline Kashmiri radical Syed Ali Shah Gilani in Delhi's LTG auditorium. I was there as a journalist, and instead of stopping them from inciting violence against India, the police arrested me and kept me inside a police van. Imagine. and they incited violence. They said Kashmir will never be a part of India. They actually spoke a lot against not just the Indian government, but anybody in Kashmir who believed in the idea of India. And later, when we went to the police saying that there should be criminal action taken against them, we were dispersed by the police. We were laughed at, and later we had to go to the court. We went to the court, and we ensured that the court orders FIR against them. And imagine, it took more than 13 years for the police to actually take action, and now has taken consent from the Lieutenant Governor V.K. Saxena of India's national capital, Delhi, to actually charge Arundhati Roy for inciting violence, for sedition, and for those criminal activities with Kashmiri radical separatists. Similarly, a lot of other incidents as well. I remember, Madhu Kishwar, for instance, who, currently seems to be right-wing, but at a certain point of time used to invite radical separatists for conferences and seminars. I remember similarly, again, around 10 or 15 years back, when in Delhi's Teen Murti, there was a seminar on Kashmir. Ram Jethmalani was present, a lot of Kashmiri radical separatists were present, and there was Yasin Malik as well. And when we, 5 or 10 Kashmiri Pandits, actually objected to the presence of Yasin Malik, Madhu Kishwar and several others asked us to shut up. And that was the reality of the day at that time. Our voices were never heard. Yasin Malik similarly was, invited to another massive media platform, the India Today Conclave, where he was a chief guest, and, in a youth panel, he was an inspiration for the youth. And he was actually, invited to the stage by Anand Mahindra. Imagine that. And this happened during the UPA government, during the Congress government. And we were protesting outside the hotel, and we were actually lathi charged. There was violence against us by the police. And again, we were arrested. Imagine victims of terrorism being arrested and terrorists being garlanded. So we've seen worse of times in these years. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how much we have suffered. And every time we used to go to the newspapers with our press release and details of our protest, of our awareness campaigns, etc., nobody used to bother about it. At least 90% of the press was completely silent to that, especially the international press. So there's been this silence by the so-called leftist, left liberal cabal, the intelligentsia, and of course the Islamist lobby all across, who did not want the reality of the Kashmiri Hindu exodus to really come out. And I'm glad that 2 years back, Vivek Agnihotri and Pallavi Joshi came ahead and actually made the Kashmir files. They were in touch with my father, Dr. Kaul, all through since the inception of the idea. And later in their documentary for Z5, they interviewed me as well on, what has happened over the last 35 to 70 years in the Kashmir Valley. So I'm glad the Kashmir file came in, because this actually gave the reality to the people. The masses actually understood what happened with us. Because I remember in my journalism career, when I traveled through the length and breadth of the country and spoke about a lot of issues, and people used to ask me, where are you from? And I used to tell them I'm from Kashmir, but this exodus happened and now I'm in Delhi. So they used to ask me, what exodus are you talking about? And people in mainland India didn't know about. In Uttar Pradesh, in Kerala, in Bihar, in West Bengal, in Rajasthan, in Gujarat. And Kashmir files actually led to a massive, massive awareness. And through your medium also, I urge people to actually watch this film, The Kashmir Files, because it actually only gives the 10% of what we suffered, but it correctly points out without mincing any facts, because without any monkey balancing, and actually pays a tribute to the Kashmiri Hindu community and the resilience all these years.
Yes, Aditya ji, some of the details you're giving us like so bone chilling. And as a mother of a toddler, I can imagine, like, in your mother's position, with a 9-month-old baby to be displaced from your ancestral home. And as you mentioned, we watched the movie Kashmir Files, and as you narrate the story once again, I mean, it's just so painful. You just don't know where to begin and where to begin healing. Yeah. So Aditya ji, As a Kashmiri Hindu yourself, what are your expectations now from the Indian leadership and the Hindu community?
Well, the expectations are out there. We have been speaking and screaming about it for the last 30 years. First and foremost is justice. There cannot be any kind of reconciliation. There cannot be any kind of a return. There cannot be any kind of a rehabilitation until there is justice. So the government of India, just like they have done with the massacre that happened with the Sikh community in Delhi, the Sikh community, thousands of them were killed and lynched, and there are cases that are still underway for the last 40 years. So if it can rightly happen with the Sikh community, and justice can be delivered after 40 years, why not with the Kashmiri Hindus? So we demand a commission of inquiry that the government of India or the Supreme Court of India should actually launch to actually ask the victims of the Kashmiri Hindu genocide to come forward and speak. There are a lot of victims who are willing to come forward. There are a lot of witnesses who actually want to come forward. So there should be a commission of inquiry to actually see to the reasons why this exodus is happening. Your first question. This is what historically needs to be answered by the government of India and by this commission of inquiry, so that history doesn't again mince facts. The reality should be out there for the open for the people. And second is to restore our temples in the Kashmir Valley. A lot of our temples are desecrated. Of course, there are few prominent ones like Shankaracharya Temple, like Kheer Bhavani, which are okay, which are being looked forward after. But there are a lot of temples in the interiors. There would be, I think, more than 700 or 800 temples. Smaller temples, bigger temples, temples in the interiors. And these are old, really, really old temples. And you need to restore and rehabilitate it. A lot of it needs to come under the Archaeological Survey of India as well. But the Archaeological Survey India needs more funding, a lot of support to actually care for these temples. And of course, a lot of excavations need to be carried out in South and North Kashmir, because we know every few months that when there's a construction going on, an excavation going on, there are old idols and murtis of goddesses and gods that are coming out. And these are hundreds and thousands of years old. So this is our rich heritage and should be taken care of. And of course, if there is justice, then there will be reconciliation, because then there will be a truth and reconciliation commission that could be established on the pattern of what happened in South Africa. So I think the beginning should be made through justice, through ensuring that our rights are given to us equally as people, as Indians, and as people who have their homeland in the Kashmir Valley. If this happens gradually, I think then finally we can reach a stage when we can think of a rehabilitation. And the rehabilitation, of course, cannot happen at the same places where we used to stay, because those areas have been taken over. There are no minorities that are staying. So we need a single place of stay where the entire community can actually stay in the Kashmir Valley. So this probably gradually can be done. I was skeptical for many years that this cannot happen. Even today, I'm not fully confident. But after Article 370 abrogation that happened in 5th August 2019, I have my hope. I think if something unthinkable like 370 can go away, then certainly something unthinkable like our rehabilitation can also happen someday. Maybe I may not be alive to see that day, but perhaps my future generations, some Hindus, can return someday.
Yeah, and what do you expect from the Hindu community? Any expectations from the Hindu Samaj?
Well, I don't entirely blame the Hindu Samaj for the silence, because, at that time, the media, the intelligentsia, the politicians, kept the reality from them. Of course, larger population in India remained silent. But once we met that exodus and lived outside, a lot of help was given to us as well by our neighbors, by people who empathize with us even today. When people hear about it, they say, it was very tragic, it was very sad. So what I expect from the Hindu community, not just in India, but all across the globe, is to keep alive this story. Because it's not a story, it's a reality. It's something that a huge mass of Hindu population has gone through. And congressmen, senators, parliamentarians, politicians, opposition leaders, public policy leaders, technocrats, all should be aware of what happened with the Kashmiri Hindu community, no matter which country you belong to. Because if we speak about, Holocaust, if we speak about different wars that have happened from time to time, if we speak about tragedies, tragedies, of course, cannot be compared, but all tragedies need to be remembered. There needs to be a memorial for it. And of course, we need to have a homage for such people. So I think this exodus, the martyrs of the exodus, need to be remembered always. The story needs to be narrated because this is not the end of it. It's perhaps a story that is still in motion. It's a fluid situation. Kashmiri Hindus are still being killed. It's not happening. Massacre is not happening. Like 24 Kashmiri Pandits like Nandigram or, Vandama is not happening. Nadi Marg and Vandama is not happening. But single Kashmiri Pandits are happening because terrorism, has changed a lot because, I cover national security and foreign affairs as well. And I can tell you that terrorism in Kashmir has shifted a lot after 370. There's a new form of terrorism that's called hybrid terrorism. And that is that any person who's radical in the society, it could be a teacher, it could be a student, it could be a regular shop owner, it could be a lawyer, it could be any person, an unemployed youth, anybody who's radicalized enough, who's given a gun or a grenade and said that this is your target and you have to kill this person and then just vanish. And the police and the army cannot catch this person easily because this person is not known to anyone. This person is not actually listed in the terror list of A category, B category, C category terrorists. So it's very difficult to catch such people. So such form of hybrid terrorism is on a rise. Kashmiri Hindus have become a victim of it in the last 3 to 4 years. We've had a lot of migrant workers from UP, Rajasthan, Punjab, West Bengal, who have been working in the Kashmir Valley, who have been targeted. They could be carpenters, they could be vendors, they could be, street hawkers who have been killed and eliminated. And of course, even local Muslim population, as I said, anybody who believes in the Indian constitution, who believes in the Indian tricolor, who believes in the bravery and the courage of the Indian army and the J&K police and the CRPF is targeted again. So I think we need to be careful about it. I, for one, will tell you that I have received numerous threats, both from Pakistani terror groups, from terror groups in Kashmir, and from the Khalistani terror groups back in Canada. So I move along now with 2 gunmen that have been provided to me by the security forces. But everybody does not have that kind of security once they move in Kashmir, and Kashmiri Pandits still fear going there because everything is not hunky-dory. 370 has happened and had to happen, should have happened 50 years ago. But I think to restore that confidence for the return of Kashmiri Hindus, it will take a lot of time.
But I also hear that tourism has increased in Kashmir recently. So how do you think that tourism has increased, but Kashmiri Pandits are still being targeted?
I won't compare the two because, I would love my homeland to be prosperous. I would love my homeland to be known to the world, just like the time when my great-grandfather or the grandfather used to stay there. I may not be there, some people may call me selfish. Some people may call me that I have double standards. But, I'm happy, when I speak or know about tourism increasing in the Kashmir Valley. There is, of course, a pain inside me that, I was born there in the Kashmir Valley, but I had to move out. I live in a life of, exodus and exile. And, when people ask me, where's your home? Where do you stay? I'm in a puzzle because for 27 years, I've stayed in Delhi. And for the last, 3-4 years, I've been in Noida. So, I've been really, I always think, and that thought of home really brings a lot of, gory memories. And because I've seen my parents go through a lot of hardships in life, we lost everything in the Kashmir Valley and they had to begin in Delhi from scratch. My father was a publisher, so he took books in cartons and sacks on his shoulder to rebuild life. My mother, because of her PhD, got a government job in the Ministry of Culture, and that's how we survived. It was thanks to my mother and my father. And that's the story of the entire Hindu community, Kashmiri Hindu community. Like all parents, all grandparents have struggled so much for their kids, for their youth. So this idea of home always trickles these thoughts and longing to return. But someday we will return home. And till that time, I mean, why not have good tourism, have more international people come in. You know, we had a fantastic G20 summit there. I covered it as a journalist. For the first time, we had so many international delegates come in, and I haven't seen in the last at least 15, 20 years since I've been a journalist such a massive crowd and a successful international G20 event taking place in the Kashmir Valley. So this kind of a progress of better tourism, of better hospitality industry, and progress in the Kashmir Valley, this pains Pakistan. Pakistan does not like it. Pakistan wants the Kashmiris to suffer so that they can incite more violence. Pakistan actually wants Kashmiris to suffer just like Pakistanis are suffering. Pakistan has kept India hate as their prime foreign policy objective. They are not like India. When Russia-Ukraine war was being talked about, Prime Minister Modi's quote, "This is not an era of war," was being talked about globally. India hosted successfully a recent G20 summit where there was a historic consensus. But Pakistan does not care about that. Pakistan has an economic crisis. Pakistan has a security crisis. And now Pakistan has a political crisis. Pakistani prime ministers are either killed or they actually meet exile or they just vanish. Or they're imprisoned. Imran Khan is in prison right now. Nawaz Sharif has been in exile in UK, and now he will be returning. So I think Pakistan is in a self-devastation mode, and it is shocked after Article 370 abrogation because whatever it wanted in the Kashmir Valley is not happening, and the international propaganda is also not helping them anymore because after 370 abrogation, two countries that almost welcomed India's move were UAE and Maldives. And UAE and Saudi are more close to India today than Pakistan. So, as a secular country, but with Hindu values, India has shown to the world not just peace, but how to move forward, how to bring in a consensus at a time when nobody wants to see eye to eye. There are wars happening. There is Russia-Ukraine war that's been underway for 20 months. There is, of course, the Israel-Hamas terrorist war that is underway as well. So I think India has shown the way. India will continue to be a guiding light ahead. And in this direction, if there is progress in Jammu and Kashmir, I think it is fruitful for the country, for the larger population. And I think as Kashmiri Hindus, we can sacrifice that much because we have seen worse, trust me, in the last 30, 35 years. And I don't hate it anyways. If there is better tourism or better progress or development in the Kashmir Valley, there should be much more of it. But side by side, the government of India should also care about the Aboriginal people, the Kashmiri Hindus, and someday speak about their rights and create conditions in the Kashmir Valley that Kashmiri Hindus can return.
Yes, I mean, as you said, I just hope that day comes soon when Kashmiri Hindus can return back to their ancestral land, Aditya ji. And speaking internationally, is there a pattern to this persecution of Hindus around the world specifically and minorities in general?
Of course, there is a pattern. Islamists have been at it for decades, for centuries. I mean, again, where should I begin? This persecution have continued in the Kashmir context also. If I give you one example, is about Aurangzeb and Guru Tegh Bahadur. How actually Guru Tegh Bahadur came to the rescue of the Kashmiri Hindus when Aurangzeb wanted to eliminate the community. And similarly, I think the Sikh community and the Hindu community has been very close. And the Islamists and people like in Pakistan, do not want this. They do not want this kind of progress and brotherhood between the Hindus and Sikhs. And again, there are these Khalistanis who have been sponsored by Pakistan and Islamist lobby. They again do not want Hindus and Sikhs to be together. So they create divisions. They create hate India campaigns. They sponsor farmers in India to protest against the Indian constitution. So there's been a pattern to it. We see similar Islamist radicalization that is happening in the south of India. You have stories in the last 7 to 8 years of how educated Muslim youth actually went to Syria, went to Afghanistan, went to Iraq to join the ISIS. There are similar ISIS networks that have been busted, not just in Kerala, but in Karnataka, in Telangana, Andhra as well. So I think we should be concerned. We should be really, prepared. I think the Indian agencies are prepared. The Indian intelligence agencies are also very much aware of how this is happening. And similarly now, as if the Islamist terror wasn't enough and the Islamist hate campaign wasn't enough and, this Hindu phobia that has now creeped in wasn't enough. Now we have these Khalistanis also attacking Hindus. And there are several examples that are coming in from Canada, from UK, Australia, and US, but predominantly from Canada. In UK, US, and Australia, we still expect that there will be some action that will be taken. I hope they do. But in Canada, mostly, we see Hindu temples being attacked. We see Hindu community being intimidated. But again, in UK, also we saw in, I think, a year or so ago, when the Muslim mobs actually attacked Hindus. A lot of people were arrested, including Hindus, in that. But I really hope that Rishi Sunak, his Home Secretary, and the government of UK actually wake up to the situation. Most recently, we saw the Indian High Commissioner, Vikram Doraiswamy, who was manhandled and heckled at a Gurdwara in Scotland. And he was, in fact, a guest of the local Gurdwara when these criminal goons, illiterate, mad people actually came in and tried to manhandle him. So I think we've been victims for a very long time. But the best part about Hindus is that we don't play victims. We speak up. We have shown resilience. We have, in fact, shown the mirror to all those people who have remained silent for a very long time to our plight. And we will continue to do the same. In the Delhi riots a few years ago as well, we saw a similar pattern where Hindus were killed. In fact, an intelligence bureau officer, a Hindu, was also killed in a very barbaric fashion. We saw, in fact, a few years ago when India brought in the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA, and that was for the minorities in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. And this was their right. I mean, why not? We are the only nation that actually cares about Hindus. And it's not just about Hindus, Sikhs, and other minorities who are continuously suffering in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. And we wanted to get them in, easily make them accessible to Indian citizenship. So why not? And there was a propaganda hate campaign launched by some vested interests and groups trying to manipulate facts. They tried to show as if Muslims were not being given citizenship. And they told Western governments and Capitol Hill and House of Commons that the reality is that this is discrimination and this is apartheid and this is whatnot. But the reality was that the original citizenship that is given, that was already there. Muslims could apply there. But this particular CAA was only for the minorities suffering in these Muslim countries that are in India's neighborhood. So there is no discrimination at all that is there. The US, the Europe takes, asylum seekers, political asylum seekers, etc., on their own rules. Why not India? So I think, a lot of propaganda happens. A lot of people are manipulated, brainwashed to a great extent. And it's much later, years after, that the reality really comes up. In Delhi, in JNU, you saw a few years back in 2016, how there were slogans raised of breaking India, or breaking Kashmir. And when then action was taken, it was as if created that, it was an attack on democracy. That's not the reality. The reality is that there have been Islamist terror groups who have created this kind of network and an ecosystem all across, and that ecosystem has to be busted. Because if it isn't, then we will continue to become victims of this kind of a terrorism, and our people would be forcibly converted, just like we see in Pakistan. We see in Sindh what the Islamist preacher Mia Mithu is doing. He is converting Hindus and Sikh teenage girls, young girls, who are kidnapped, converted, and married off to Muslim Islamist mobsters. So I think the governments need to wake up, including the government of India. There needs to be much more action that needs to be taken to safeguard the interests and the human rights of the Hindu community.
So, in your opinion, Aditya ji, how can the Hindu community living in the West, UK, support and help in healing the pain and wounds of our Kashmiri Hindu brothers and sisters?
Not much. Just keep your culture alive. Just do what Inside UK is doing. I mean, you hold these seminar sessions, you speak to your local lawmakers, to your congressmen, to your parliamentarians, and make them aware of your rights, of your history, of your suffering. That's been happening continuously. Give them a fact sheet of what's been happening continuously. Do advocacy because you have to speak up for your own rights. And I, for instance, if I will tell you, when I was 16 years old, I formed a group called Roots in Kashmir to spread awareness about Kashmiri Hindus. And it became a huge moment, where we not just held exhibitions and seminars and sessions, we had theater performances as well, and we had protests. And every time separatists and terrorists like Yasin Malik and Gilani used to come to Delhi, we used to counter them. We used to put facts, we used to tell them about the exodus, we used to tell them the reality of the Islamist terrorists and how they've been killing the innocent population. And there is no reality in this propaganda of Azadi. So I think one needs to be aware. One needs to not just be aware, but then spread that awareness all across among your family, among your friends, and most importantly, your locality, your society. And of course, as I said, your lawmakers and people who really matter. I think that would be the biggest service if the Hindu community does. Because often what happens is that, not just in the Hindu community, but all across, we, of course, discuss a lot of things. We party, we enjoy, we celebrate our culture, and then we fight amongst ourselves to decide, who will be the leader. Because we all are educated and we all trust ourselves, and that is okay. But I think in an individual capacity as well, and in a group, if we work continuously, we will be really successful. Because even after I did Roots in Kashmir, I had to quit later because I joined active journalism and I couldn't do activism or advocacy. But as an individual, I have continued the momentum. I speak about Kashmir very vociferously. My views haven't changed. Nobody has been able to, even though I was told initially by my editors and bosses that you will face a lot of problems for your views on Kashmir. And I said, just like the sun and the moon that come every night and every morning, the truth also comes. And you can't escape from the truth. I don't have to hide my truth to look a certain way to my community or to my profession or to my country. So I think you should be very vociferous. Of course, respecting the local law, respecting the local culture, local society, having empathy in your mind, but you should be vociferous in speaking the truth.
Thank you for that message, Aditya ji, because I did watch your journey from a refugee home to where you are now. And it's been such an inspiring journey for any one of us who watch your journey. So I was coming to that. So what would be your takeaway for the Hindu community in the UK and elsewhere for self-preservation? In your opinion, what must we do to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself?
I think the Hindu community already is doing a lot. We have done a lot to preserve our culture. The larger Indian diaspora all across the globe has kept their roots intact. We get a glimpse of it every time Prime Minister Narendra Modi actually visits to these countries, particularly UK, Australia, US, in the Europe, in Singapore, Malaysia, anywhere, because Indians are everywhere. And of course, people love Indian food as well, Indian culture, Indian dances, Indian music, of course, Bollywood to a great extent. But I think we need to wake up to the political realities as well. And these political realities are important because if this exodus that happened to us and people all across the globe had risen at that time and spoken up and protested, I think history would have been a little different. So we don't want another such exodus to happen in Kerala or in Assam or in West Bengal or in any other part of the country. To stop that, we need to force our governments to act. We need to actually speak truth to the power and actually organize a lot of these such awareness advocacy events all across the globe. And that's how we will keep at it. There's a lot of propaganda that happens these days, a lot of disinformation and misinformation that keeps happening, and particularly the Hindu community comes as a target, and we are branded as Islamophobic. Not realizing that we have been victims of the Islamist terror that has been justified by a lot of human rights activists all across. And not just the Hindu community, we have the Jewish community that has suffered similarly. I remember in 2015 when I was in Jerusalem, and I interviewed Ambassador Mark Regev, who was the advisor to Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. And outside the Prime Minister's office, he walked and crossed the road and spoke to me on television. And he told me something very innocently, but very, very deep, which has stayed with me always. He said that, Aditya, I'll tell you something. We Jews have suffered just like the Hindus. You've been victims of Islamist terror, Hindus in India, and Jews have been victims of Islamist terror for decades, and the world has remained silent. Nobody has spoken about it. And again, we saw recently how Hamas terror attack took place, a brutal, brutal terror attack. I call it much bigger than 9/11 because the population of Israel is much smaller, and it has the capacity and the resilience and the courage to actually withstand such kind of an Islamist onslaught. Imagine 1,500 terrorists actually barging inside through land, sea, and air and killing innocent Jews. And then again, the world remaining silent. Nobody caring about the hostages that were taken away. Nobody demanding justice for the victims, 1,400 innocent civilians who were killed, and then justifying the violence, terrorism from Hamas. Similar things happened in Kashmir Valley, where Hizbul Mujahideen, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hurriyat Conference, JKLF were defended time and again. So we don't want a repeat of that. Indian government, Indian people have taken a tough stand in the Kashmir Valley. And finally, that tough stand had to happen years ago. But I'm glad, I thank God, I thank the government, I of course thank the Prime Minister for showing the courage to take that important step. But we don't want another such exodus to happen. We don't want another such ethnic cleansing to happen. We don't want another community to become or suffer what Kashmiri Hindus suffered. For that, we'll have to be united. For that, we'll have to have a common voice. And I think that's the way forward.
Yes, I totally concur with all the points you've raised and your perspective. And I sincerely hope the Hindu Samaj and leadership come together to support one another and share their stories with the world, just like you've come out and shared your story. As you said, keeping the story alive, making your voice heard. And that's very important. And, we look forward to hearing you again. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. Dhanyavad, Aditya ji.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to Insight UK for being a voice of the Indian diaspora and particularly the Hindu Samaj in UK. And I look forward to meet you in UK and otherwise keep in touch and keep at it. Keep the good fight going. And I think we should be proud of our culture, proud of our Hindu ancestry, our temples, our gods, and our reality, our truth cannot be hidden. It will emerge, it will shine. India has always been a guiding light, and Bharatvarsh will continue to be a guiding light all across the globe.
Thank you, Aditya ji. Your story has been a story of courage, conviction, and integrity. So you're an inspiration to all of us, and thanks to your brave journalism, where the narratives have always been tilted towards one side, and there's been so much propaganda around it, and it's journalists like you who bring out the truth so bravely. And I hope you stay safe. We wish you safety and good health. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dhanyavad.
Thank you so much. Namaskar.